Hi, this is the Regular Magazine. I'm Jason, and today we're going to take a look at peasant uprisings and revolts of the medieval period in Britain. The medieval period in Britain was characterised not only by the struggles of kings and nobles, but it was also by the resilience and resistance of the common people. Now, peasant uprisings were fueled by grievances over oppressive taxation, land enclosures, and social injustices, and these punctuated the landscape of medieval Britain between the sort of 12th and 15th century. These uprisings were often overlooked in the traditional historical sort of narratives, represented the aspirations of the downtrodden and the quest for dignity and justice in an era that was pretty much marked by feudal hierarchy and aristocratic privilege. Now, the first revolt we're going to look at is the revolt of 1173 to 1174, and it was in the tumultuous reign of Henry II. There was a lot of discontent simmering amongst the peasantry over heavy taxation and feudal obligations. Now, the revolt was led by Henry's sons and disaffected barons, and it encompassed a sort of broader resistance against royal authority. Now, while primarily this was a noble rather than peasant revolt, the uprising saw elements of peasant discontent, as rural communities bore the brunt of levied taxes and feudal exactions. Though ultimately suppressed, the revolt highlighted the deep-seated grievances simmering beneath the surface of medieval society. Now, the next one we're going to look at is the Great Revolt of 1381, also known as the Peasants' Revolt, and it was amongst the most significant of the peasant uprisings in medieval England, and was also known, as I said, as the Peasants' Revolt, and it was sparked by the imposition of poll taxes and was exacerbated by social economic injustices. The rebellion erupted into widespread violence and social upheaval. It was led by figures such as Wat Tyler and John Ball. Now, the revolt drew support right across the social spectrum, encompassing not just peasants but artisans and urban labourers. The rebels marched on London demanding an end to serfdom, and wanting equitable taxation and the abolition of feudal privileges. Now, although the revolt was brutally suppressed, with the leaders such as Wat Tyler being executed, and promises of the reform were reneged upon, its legacy endured as a symbol of peasant resistance and the quest for social justice. So the next one we'll take a look at is called Jack Cade's Rebellion of 1450. Now, it was against the backdrop of the War of the Roses. And it was a tumultuous period. Cade's rebellion emerged as a poignant expression of peasant discontent. It was named after its enigmatic leader, and the rebellion arose from grievances over corruption, misrule, and economic hardship. Now, Cade's rebels marched on London, articulating demands for political reform to come to an end, and an end of the oppressive taxation and the redress of social inequalities. Now, the rebellion briefly did seize control of the capital, and this signalled the vulnerability of royal authority amidst widespread disaffection. However, like its predecessors, Jack Cade's rebellion faced a violent suppression as the royal forces quelled the uprising and restored order through the force of arms. Yet the rebellion served as a harbinger of the sort of changing political landscape and the growing demands by the population for popular participation in governance. Now, peasant uprisings in the medieval Britain between the 12th and 15th centuries represented pivotal moments of resistance and defiance against entrenched power structures. From the revolt of 1173 to 74 to the Peasants' Revolt and Jack Cade's Rebellion, These movements reflected the sort of aspirations of ordinary men and women for dignity, justice and autonomy in the age of a feudal oppression. While many of these uprisings were ultimately crushed by the forces of authority, their legacy endured symbols of popular resistance and enduring quest for social change. In the annals of history, the voices of the medieval peasantry resonate as reminders of the indomitable spirit of human resilience and pursuit of more just and equitable society. Now, we've only touched on three of the rebellions and uprisings from the medieval period. There were several others. Some were not as sort of big and national as these particular three were. Some were very kind of localized, but there was a lot of sort of uprisings, small revolts during that period of British history, and it was basically things were starting to change, and by the time we come out of the medieval period into the Renaissance, and then we're going into sort of like, we eventually end up in the English Civil War. But this period did see a lot of sort of rebellion, people protesting, those protests would become quite violent, and so we had this period of where the peasants they had enough, and they basically were telling the sort of aristocracy how they felt, and so there was around the country there were several, like from small to sort of large uprisings and revolts and various, violent sort of conflicts between the peasantry and the nobles, and then they make for good wargaming scenarios. Some of them you can, like the peasants' revolt, because they were quite widespread. You could build a campaign where you end up in London and with a big sort of final sort of engagement conflict, and then you just kind of build up as the revolt builds up your forces. And there are now producers out there producing miniatures that you can use for peasant sort of forces. War Games Atlantic, for instance, do it in 28mm. I think Fireforge may do some peasants that were suitable for 28mm as well. You've got quite a few bits and pieces in 1/7/2 scale, in which you could build out a peasant force to recreate and campaign on a sort of revolt. And you don't have to sort of follow the historical ones. You could just make one up, to be honest. We're set in X part of the UK, and we're going to have a revolt around there, and it's going to encompass these sort of places and parts of that particular part of the country. And it wasn't just in England. You saw peasant revolts. There was quite a few in sort of Wales that were quite historically put down in a sort of quite a sort of savage way, because you had uprisings in Scotland and stuff like that, which led to Scotland coming out, taking back control of Scotland for a period, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on around the UK during the medieval period where peasants rose up. Some of those uprisings were led by nobles. Some were just led by normal individuals, such as the Peasants' Revolt, where a lot of those the leaders weren't from nobility. They were just from the ordinary sort of common man. So, but there's a lot of options for the medieval period for creating a peasant army and using it for a revolt and uprising. Anyway, that's all for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I shall see you next time. Cheers.